So every day of our lives, we are bombarded with statistics and data and arguments and very often cheap points of rhetoric upon which people will try to advocate for a given position on something. And all these things agglomerate in our minds. They enter the public consciousness. We hear other people parrot the same things. And our decision making or our ability to form opinions is all influenced by that, and it's influenced by that stuff constantly, and it engenders really quite a big problem. Since I've spent a lot of time and effort looking into the history and the current status of cannabis legislation worldwide, for instance, and drug legislation worldwide. And cannabis legalization is, of course, something that I advocate for pretty persistently, and I do so because it's such a hugely important issue on so many levels, which really goes underreported, and very rarely the real benefits of cannabis legalization go very much underreported. Its efficacy was a usefulness in things like carbon sequestration and so on, and the fact that we're going to need it in the future to replace ammonium nitrate fertilizers that we synthesize from natural gas, all this sort of thing to get our crops yields up and so on. It goes very underreported, and there's a huge amount of bullshit prevalent in society. And yes, it is sponsored by big corporate interests to try and protect their profits for every psychiatric medication they prescribe, every minor painkiller they prescribe. And yeah, there's still a hell of a lot of money being made from paracetamol, ibuprofen, and aspirin, which I suspect was the original reason cannabis was made illegal. And then I come across, well, I do the research into it, and I realize that rates of drug-induced psychosis in the United States compared to 0.42% of the population, whereas 3% of the population are expected to have psychosis at some point in their lives. The statistical significance for cannabis use as an independent risk factor in psychosis is no greater than for the rest of the population, that doesn't use cannabis. The data reflects the fact that the use of cannabis is no more or less likely to cause psychosis. They're not using it, and it's things like this. And if we knew, by the way, that cannabis did act as an independent risk factor for psychosis, or that it led reliably to a development of psychosis, even in a portion of the population, it's not that it would be illegal. It's just no one would use it. No one would use it if there's a risk factor for developing psychosis. We really wouldn't. We would never have been using it in medicine for as long as we have been. We'd never entertain using it as a medicine if it was making 1 in 10 people psychotic. It's and you still get people who trot around and believe that the government, they care for us, the big private corporate industry, they have our best interests at heart, and they will care about us. And it was made illegal in 1921. It was nothing to do with trying to appropriate German trademarks for minor painkillers, ibuprofen, paracetamol, and aspirin, off the back of the initial plan to sequester trademarks for morphine, heroin, and cocaine from German pharmaceutical companies via World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. It's nothing like that. And the unimaginable oceans of money that were available to be made as a result of that, it just comes out of it. Oh no, it's like, it might make you go mad. So you just realize this. Do you know what I mean? Like, Like, this was never deemed a problem before, ever. Craziness. It is. It's craziness. In fact, it's deluded thinking. It really is. Everyone who believes, that cannabis causes psychosis, they're all delusional. The evidence, the real data we have on this, and the prevalence of drug-induced so-called psychosis versus non-drug-induced psychosis, again so-called, is no greater in the data of the United States in 2019 or in recent years. Is about what you'd expect it to be in, at a baseline for the rest of the population, risk of psychosis and cannabis use. And another thing, like, if this were clearly demonstrable in the data, there'd be one study on it. It wouldn't be this continued, like, trickle of rubbishy research and meta-analyses that say things like, oh, daily use of high potency cannabis may be a risk factor for psychosis. And the problem focuses on, like, when these laws were initially passed in the early 20th century, people were, generally speaking, a lot less educated than they are now, or had access to inferior education. I imagine that's a large part of the reason. And people were even more trusting back then of authority and of doctors and scientists back then than they are now. And I imagine the reason why it's allowed to persist, really, this sort of ignorant, unbelievable, stupidity, really. The reason why it's allowed to persist is that people trust authority, and they don't question, they don't equip themselves well enough with the faculties of critical thinking and analysis to really be able to evaluate the statistics independently and draw their own conclusions from it. And again, part of the problem is education and the quality of education that we're given. We're not really taught critical thinking at school. It's a big problem. It's we're shunted into classrooms or herded into classrooms. There's a teacher say, "Now it happened this, and this is the truth." Like, okay, so we've got nothing to think about for ourselves. No, we don't want you to have original ideas. We want you to rehash all the sources and so on in your coursework and use acceptable stuff and just, like, put something together that looks right. But this doesn't seem very educational to me. It seems like more like propaganda. So, yeah, the way of fixing a broken society is taking responsibility for doing it and trying to raise awareness of it, and equipping yourself with the tools of thinking and analysis to be able to detect bullshit accurately and consistently. And when people offer bullshit in arguments and debates, to be able to put them right and demonstrate clearly why a point they've raised is spurious or nonsensical. And if we have more success doing that, we might have more success. And if we keep applying pressure and not give up with this, saying we need this for all these reasons, fuel and very, very tough plastics and building materials and medicine and textiles and paper and everything else, all these reasons we need cannabis, and carbon sequestration and fixing nitrogen in soil and repairing soil structure. We do need it for all these reasons. And this piddling issue of supposed psychosis goes against the data. Okay? It is undermined by research and facts. This notion that there's a causal link between cannabis and psychosis, it is another medical old wives' tale from a pseudoscience riddled appendage of our societies. and it's ruining our societies. It's ruining our civilization because it is based on nothing more than hokey bullshit put out by charlatans and people who can't read data or analyze data, and that is all. So yeah, don't keep questioning, be critical in your thinking, learn how to detect and know what to look for when in analyzing, say, the data on cannabis use and psychosis, because it is 0.4% of the population. It's no greater or less than the rest of the population's risk of fucking psychosis. You know, try and do that. Be persistent, yes.